I have 3 children. If that is too many, you needn't answer at all. You keep your father's name. I'll keep you. For 5 weeks in the autumn of 1884, Etta Cole stopped at the post office on Halsted Street on her way home from the laundry. And every evening there was nothing, and every evening she told herself that nothing was the answer. She had answered an advertisement in a matrimonial paper in the first week of September. 9 lines at 15 cents a line. A stockman in Montana Territory, 38, land and cattle, in want of a wife, no objection to a woman of plain circumstances. She wrote that letter out 3 times. In the first 2, she left the thing out. In the third, she put it in, low on the second page, where a man would come upon it only after he had already decided he liked her hand. I have 3 children. If that is too many, you needn't answer at all. She said that part out loud before she sealed it, to hear how it would sound in a stranger's kitchen. Then she mailed it and got ready to be turned down. On the 11th of October, the clerk put an envelope on the counter that was too thick to be a refusal. Refusals are thin. She had had 2 of those already that autumn, from 2 other addresses, and she knew the weight of a man's regrets to the ounce. She opened it standing at the counter, because she could not have carried it home shut. 4 railroad tickets came out into her hand. Chicago to St. Paul, and St. Paul West on the Northern Pacific, to a siding she had never heard anybody say out loud. She counted them twice at the counter. 4, not 1. 1 line of writing was folded in with them, in pencil, on the back of a feed bill. 4 seats. Tuesday is the train that stops here. C. Bram. Then she went out onto Halsted Street, with 4 tickets in her fist, and stood against the brick of the building a while before she could walk. Here is what those 4 tickets were coming to collect. 2 rooms on the 3rd floor of a frame house behind a tannery. $4.50 a month. Water down in the yard. Etta took in washing and did fine mending, and in a good month, she cleared $11. And there had not been a good month since June. Asa Cole had been a carpenter on the elevator cruise along the river. In March of '83, he went up on the staging at a grain house on the West Bank and did not come down off it. He was 34. That is all I intend to say about the manner of it, and it is all his widow ever said about it either. Davy was 11. He carried his father's watch in his pocket and gave it 7 turns every night before he slept, and he had never once let anybody else put a hand on it. Junie was 7, and what she had kept of her father was a coat and the smell of sawdust. Micah was 3. He did not remember the man at all, and that was the thing that frightened Etta worst, on the nights she let herself be frightened. I have turned over a good many of those matrimonial papers out of the early '80s, and I want to set one thing straight before we go any further west. The advertisements are not romantic. They are inventory. A man gives his age, his acres, his stock, his church if he has one, and then the word matrimony, and that is the end of him. 15 cents a line teaches a man to be brief. The women's columns run the same way. Age, health, housekeeping, needlework, and a disposition described as cheerful by every last one of them. What you will hunt a long time for in any of those columns is a child. A woman with children did not advertise. She answered, and she put it at the bottom of the second page, and she waited to be told no. A great many of them were told no, and not one of those women is in any book anywhere, because nobody keeps the thin letters. I made these 5 people up. I did not make up the paper they came out of. She sold the stove and the bedstead for $12 and packed what was left into one trunk and a carpet bag. Clothes, a Bible with the 4 of them written inside the front cover, Ace's rule and his marking gauge, and a photograph made on State Street the summer Junie was born. Davy asked no questions at all about Montana. He asked one question about Chicago, standing in the door of the empty room with the watch in his hand. Who's going to keep it up? He meant the grave. It was out at a cemetery on the west side, in a lot his mother had paid on by the month for a year and 8 months, and there was no stone on it yet, only a marker with a number. Etta Cole had nothing to tell him that was worth anything, so she told him the truth, which was that nobody would. He put the watch in his pocket and went down the stairs ahead of her, and he did not speak to her again until St. Paul. They went out of Chicago on a Tuesday in the 3rd week of October, and people of their means went in the emigrant car. An emigrant car is a coach at the cheap end of the train with the upholstery left off, plank seats, a stove at one end, a water barrel, and whatever a family could carry aboard to eat for 3 days. At St. Paul, the conductor came down the car, punching tickets, and stopped at Micah. "That one's not 5, he said. "He rides free on my train." "He has a ticket," Etta said. The conductor turned it over and had to allow that he did. He punched it and handed it back, and she put it away in her glove with the others. It cost $9.25, half fare, to buy a seat for a 3-year-old who could have gone the whole distance on his mother's lap for nothing. I want you to hold on to that figure, because it is the closest thing to a love letter anybody in this story ever wrote down. Cyrus Bram had not laid eyes on that child. He had one line off the bottom of a second page, and he walked into the agent's office at Tallow Creek and paid $9.25, so a boy he had never met would have somewhere to sit. Tallow Creek was a section house, a water tank, a store, and 11 buildings that had not been there 3 years before. The train stopped a minute and a half. There was one man on the platform. He took his hat off when the 4 of them came down the steps, said, "Mrs. Cole," and then ran out of words. Etta stood in the cold with Micah on her hip and waited for the thing she had been waiting for since September, for him to look at the children and do the arithmetic on his face. He did look at them. He looked at all 3, one after another, taking his time over it. And what came into his face was not arithmetic. Then he took up the trunk by one end like a sack of feed and carried it out to the wagon. It was a spring wagon with the box built up. In the box there was hay, forked in loose and deep and pressed down flat, and laid out on the hay were 3 blankets, folded. They were not 3 of a kind. One was long, one was middling, one was small enough for a child of 3. He had never seen them in his life. He had bought bedding by their ages, off one line at the bottom of a letter. Junie climbed up into the hay by herself and lay down on the middling one without being told, because she was 7, and it was plainly hers. It is 14 miles from Tallow Creek to the Brown place, north and then west, up onto the bench above the creek. He said 3 things on the way: that the low ground they crossed, floods in June, that the school kept 8 months, with the winter term opening the third Monday in November, and the teacher was a good one. And near the end, that a person gets used to the weather up on the bench faster than he expects to. Micah went to sleep about 5 miles out with 2 fingers hooked into the cuff of Cyrus Bram's coat sleeve. Bram moved the lines to his left hand, did not look down, did not remark on it, and drove the rest of the way one-handed. Etta watched the side of his face for 6 miles, trying to get something off it, and got nothing, and told herself that a man does not go to the expense of 4 tickets and then change his mind at the depot, and did not believe herself. Davy rode the whole 14 miles sitting up in the hay, with his back against the sideboard, facing backward, watching the town get small. The house was 2 rooms with a lean-to on the north side, logs to the window line and sawn lumber above, and a loft up a ladder with 2 new beds in it that still smelled of the mill. By the door somebody had driven 3 pegs into the wall. They were at 3 different heights. The lowest was set about as high as a 3-year-old can reach with his arm up. Junie found the pegs before she found the beds. There was a brown pony in the corral, short-legged and much too small for a grown man to have any business on. "Whose is that one?" Junie said. "That one's accounted for," Cyrus Bram said, and carried the trunk on into the house, and that was every word anybody got out of him about it that night. The old hand, Rasko, ate with them and did the talking for the whole table, which he had evidently been kept on to do. Nothing was settled about the marriage, because nothing could be. The preacher who came around Tallow Creek was a circuit man, not due until the last week of November. So there were 5 weeks to be got through, and Etta made up her mind to get through them without asking one question about it. She slept in the lean-to with Micah. Cyrus Bram slept in the barn from the first night, and never said why. By my count, Cyrus Bram said fewer than 100 words to Etta Cole in the first 2 weeks. A man who does not talk is a wall, and a woman will put behind that wall whatever she brought with her. What Etta Cole had brought with her was 2 thin refusals and a 5-week wait. So she stood at his stove and cooked for him, and reckoned herself to be on trial. She was careful. She kept the children quiet in the mornings. She counted the flour. When Micah upset the milk pail, she had him out of the room, and the boards dry before the man was in from the barn, and was ashamed of herself, and did it again the following week. Here is what he was doing over the same 2 weeks. He built a step for the lean-to door, because the sill was high for short legs. He brought a school reader up from Ordway's, left it on the table, and went out. And one Saturday, he came in with a tin of peppermints, set it in the middle of the table, said nothing whatever about it, and went back out to the barn. Neither one of them had the least notion what the other one was doing. On the second Saturday in November, he drove them all into Ordway's for the winter's goods. A store in a town that size on a Saturday is the whole county in one room. There were maybe 15 people in it, and the talk did not stop when the calls came through the door. That was worse, because it meant they had already had that conversation and did not need it again. Nobody in Tallow Creek was unkind about it. They were interested. A woman at the dry goods said the words ready-made family to another woman, not loudly and not meanly, in the tone a person uses for a bargain somebody else got. Etta heard it. So did Cyrus Bram. He set his list on the counter. Ordway, I'll want a family account. You've got an account, Mr. Bram. I've got a single man's account. I've had it since the day you opened this door. He put his hand flat on the counter. Put all of it under a family account. All 5 of us. Ordway got out the pen. The store had gone quiet in the particular way a store goes quiet when everybody in it is pretending to be busy. Under what name? Bram, Cyrus said. The rest of them are Coels. Write them the way they are. And Ordway wrote it into the book. And 15 people in Tallow Creek stood there and watched him write it, 3 weeks before there was any wedding to justify it. They were 2 miles out of Tallow Creek before she asked him, Mr. Bram, why did you send for? He drove a while. The paper said to send a ticket. It did. 1 ticket. He looked off at the bench. I was sent somewhere once on 1 ticket. I was 9 years old. That was all of it. He did not say who sent him, or where to, or what was waiting at the far end. Etta sat beside him on that wagon seat, with her mouth shut, because she had been married 11 years to a talkative man, and she knew the difference between a door being shut and a door being left unlocked. Behind them in the hay, Davy Cole had heard every word of it, and put it away wherever an 11-year-old puts the things he means to think about later. I have to set down what nobody in that house ever said out loud. November went well, and it went well, too fast, and that was the trouble with it. Junie was over the wall inside a week. The pony turned out to be hers, and she rode it to school with Davy up behind her, and she called the man Mr. Bram in a tone of voice that fooled nobody. Micah went about the yard in a pair of the man's boots that came past his knees, falling over about every 4 steps and getting up again. Davy worked like a hired hand of 14. He did every job right the first time, and said yes, sir, and no, sir, and nothing else at all. When Cyrus Bram put a hand on his shoulder at the corral one afternoon, the boy did not shrug it off and did not lean into it either. He stood still and waited for it to be over. And every night, up in the loft, in the dark, 7 turns on his father's watch. The girl and the baby could afford to be happy. They had lost a man they could hardly remember. Davy remembered everything, and he had figured out that being happy up there was going to cost somebody something, and he had decided at 11 that he would be the one to pay it. The woman who kept the boarding house at Tallow Creek stopped Etta on the walk outside Ordway's on the 13th of November, and what she said kindly, "You've got 3 of them, and a winter coming on. My brother-in-law's at the livery, and he'd take the big one on for his keep and a little besides. Bound out proper, papers and all. That's 1 less at your table till the grass comes. I want to be fair to that woman. She was not being cruel. Binding a boy out was ordinary. It filled half the back rooms in that county, and a widow with 3 children who did not bind at least one of them out was, in 1884, thought to be a poor manager. Etta was still hunting for a way to say no politely when Cyrus Bram came out of the store behind her with a sack of salt on his shoulder. "That one's accounted for," he said. Then he put the salt in the wagon. He was not angry, and he did not raise his voice, and he did not stop to argue it. By Sunday it had gone around Tallow Creek that the Bram place was not letting any of them go. I have looked through a box of school registers out of the territory schools, and there is a thing in them I did not expect. The teacher put every scholar's full name in the book on the first morning. And in a good many of those schools, the child wrote it out first, on a slate, and the teacher copied it into the register out of the child's own hand. It sounds like nothing. For most of those children, it was the first time in their lives that anybody wrote down what they were called and kept it. The school at Tallow Creek kept 8 months, 14 scholars, 1 room, 1 stove, and a teacher named Miss Prentice, 23, out from Ohio. On Monday the 17th of November, the new scholars did their slates. Junie wrote Junie Cole in letters that got smaller as she ran out of room, and handed it up, and it went into the book. Davy wrote Davy. Then he sat there with the chalk in his hand, until the stove had gone through an entire armload of wood. Then he pulled his sleeve down over his fist, wiped the slate clean, and handed it up empty. Miss Prentice did not make anything of it in front of the room. She left the line blank. She wrote a note to send home with him, and then she put the note in the stove, because she was 23, but she was nobody's fool. Davy carried the blank slate home inside his coat and did not show it to his mother. He was up before anybody the next morning and out at the woodpile with the slate under his arm. Cyrus Bram was already there, splitting, because he was always already there. Davy stood the slate against the chopping block where the man would see it, picked up an armload of stove wood, and did not say anything for a while. Then he said, "Miss Prentice wants my name in her book. She would, when Ma marries you." The boy shifted the wood over. "Do we get put down as Brams?" Cyrus Bram stood the axe against the block and took his time about it. He was never quick with words, and he understood exactly what this one was worth. "No. She'll ask me again Monday." "Then you tell her what I'm telling you now." He got down on his heels so the boy did not have to look up at him, and he said it plainly one time, the way a man says a thing he does not intend to say twice. "You keep your father's name. I'll keep you." Davy Cole stood there and turned it over, hunting for the trick in it, because he was 11, and he had learned that autumn that grown people mostly say the kind thing first and the true thing afterward. "It's on his marker," he said. "The name, in Chicago. I know it. Nobody's keeping it up." "We'll see to that," Cyrus Bram said, and picked up the axe, and that was the end of the conversation, and the two of them went on carrying wood. On the following Monday, Davy wrote out David Asa Cole in a hand he had been practicing all Sunday, and handed the slate up, and Miss Prentice copied it into the register without one word of comment. 4 nights after the woodpile, Davy came down the ladder after the others were asleep, and found the man at the kitchen table with the tally book. He put the watch on the table between them. It was a plain silver key wind with a dent in the case. "It don't keep good time," he said. "It loses about 4 minutes." Cyrus Bram picked it up as he would another man's property, turned it over, looked at the dent and gave it back. Whose was it before his? His pa's. "Then 3 men have had the use of it. It can lose 4 minutes." The boy sat down, and because the room was dark except for the one lamp, and neither of them was looking at the other, Cyrus Bram told him the piece he had never told anybody. He was 9 when the county bound him out. They gave him a ticket and a card pinned inside his coat with the name of a farm on it, and put him on the cars alone. He was on that farm 6 years. Nobody there ever put his name down anywhere, and when he walked off it at 15, nobody looked for him. "I got my name into a book the first time when I filed on this place," he said. "I stood in the land office at Helena and watched the clerk write it out. Cyrus Bram." He shut the tally book. "Everybody ought to be down in something," he said. "That's all." Etta, on her way past the ladder, heard the last of it and went on to bed, and did not let on for years that she had. The circuit preacher reached Tallow Creek on the 28th of November and married them in the schoolhouse that Friday afternoon, with the stove going and the 14 scholars kept in for it. Davy and Junie and Micah stood up as the witnesses, which is not how it is customarily done, and Miss Prentice put her name to the certificate because somebody of age had to. Cyrus Bram got through his part of it and then stood there holding his hat in front of him with both hands, as though somebody might come and take it. That evening, after the children had gone up the ladder, Etta Bram said the thing she had been carrying since St. Paul. "I'll tell you what I settled on the train. I settled it in my own mind that you wanted a housekeeper, a woman to cook and mend and keep your house. And I made up my mind on the second day that I would take that and be glad of it, because the only other thing waiting for me was a third floor behind a tannery in February." Cyrus Bram thought that over a while. "I bought 4 tickets," he said. "You did. A man doesn't buy 4 tickets for a housekeeper. He buys one." And that was the courtship of Etta Cole and Cyrus Bram, start to finish, and I have handled a great many longer ones that wore out faster. On the 8th of December, an envelope came up with the rest of the mail, addressed to Cyrus Bram. He was out at the stock, and Etta opened it, because that is what a wife does with the mail. It was a receipt from the sexton of a cemetery on the west side of Chicago. 1 year's care of a lot, grass cut, the marker kept upright, the number kept clear. $4, paid in advance by money order. The lot number was one she knew. She had paid on it by the month for a year and 8 months. The money order had been bought on the 18th of November, which was the morning after her oldest boy came home from school, with a blank slate inside his coat. Etta Bram stood in that kitchen with the paper in her hand for a good while. She never told her husband she had opened it. She put it back in the envelope and into the tally book where he kept his papers. And another one came every December after that, and she never mentioned any of those either. But at supper that night, she looked down the table at the boy who was eating and not talking, and she thought, he has got both of them now, and nobody had to take anything off anybody to do it. The weather came on in the second week of December, and the place got ready for it. The stack fenced, the coal oil laid in, a rope run from the kitchen door to the barn door for the days when a person would need it. Rasco, the old hand, drew his pay and went down to Tallow Creek to winter at the boarding house, as he did every year. Cyrus Bram had lit the barn lantern at dusk every night of the 8 years he had been on that bench. That week he handed the job over to Davy without any ceremony about it at all. Dusk, every night. Don't let me have to ask you. The boy did not say anything. He took the lantern. That Thursday, Bram drove into Ordway's for coal oil and came back with a new lantern, brass and glass, still in its paper. Ordway had asked him whether the old one had given out. No, Cyrus Bram said, and paid for it. He carried it into the house and set it on the shelf over the flour bin, still wrapped, and nobody asked him about it. Because by then, everybody under that roof had learned that the way you find out what Cyrus Bram is doing is to wait. I'll take you into one room, and then I'm done. It is the 13th of December 1884, and it has been snowing on the bench since noon, the first snow of that winter that meant it. Out on its nail the barn lantern is burning, hung there at dusk by an 11-year-old who did not have to be asked twice. Inside, there are 5 people at the table, and it is loud. Junie is telling a story about the pony that is not true. Micah has gone to sleep in his supper. Etta Bram is passing a dish and listening to a sound she has not heard in a house of hers since March of '83, which is her own children being ordinary. And on the sill of the window over the dry sink, where nobody put it and nobody explained it, the new lantern is lit. It is not lighting anything. There is nothing out that window but snow, going sideways and 14 miles of empty country between here and town. Davy noticed it first because he noticed everything. Who's that one for? Cyrus Bram did not look up from his plate. That one's accounted for. And nobody at that table said Asa Cole's name, and every one of them old enough to remember him knew whose light it was, and they went on eating. Davy Cole ran that place from 1907 until he was too stiff to get on a horse, and the box at the end of that lane said Bram on the top line, and Cole on the line under it long after both of them were gone. Now do the arithmetic with me one time, and then I will let you get on with your evening. The custom was 1 ticket. 1 ticket for the bride, and every man who ever answered one of those letters sent one. Cyrus Bram sent 4. By December there were 5 of them at that table, 1 more than he had paid for, and there was a light in the window for the 6th. Good night.